This is a week that I've provided some additional information for you that we didn't maybe necessarily plan on providing from the start, but it's a wrap up for our semester and some very important things that are happening in our state and in our schools. This week, we are discussing dyslexia in the state of Michigan, recent changes with our educational law, and what that means for educators as you're learning to be an educator, but also in your classrooms. Grand Valley and Michigan are working hard to reflect the changes made legislatively at the state level for students who receive special education services or who are in our PK-12 schools that have dyslexia or exhibit the characteristics of dyslexia. As you dig into your reading, you'll find out why that additional definition is important. This reflects work done by many other states. If you do a quick Google search of states that either have identified certain educational laws or protections or rights for students with dyslexia in their schools, or have included dyslexia as one of the disability categories for eligibility for services in schools, you'll see that there are many of them. And in this sense, Michigan is catching up a little bit. But dyslexia can be a very controversial topic. This is a gender ward belief and experience, and I think that's because for a long time we've considered dyslexia a medical diagnosis because it is a brain-based issue. And when you bring a medical diagnosis to school, it does not always translate into eligibility. And that has provided a lot of, I would say, gray area for schools and parents and families and students dealing with characteristics and with dyslexia. This is the laws and the changes are a result of 3 to 4 years of work. If you look at our Michigan Dyslexia Handbook, you'll see the first couple of pages are dedicated to people who have studied dyslexia in schools for a very long time. It's high quality resources and decisions, and it's the edit of some initial bills that went through about 2 years ago that maybe weren't realistic for schools or in the best interest of students that need extra support. Some schools, some of our K-12 schools are already doing many of the things that are outlined in the new legislation and some of the things you'll see in these slides. What this does for those schools is align for other districts and other counties. Other schools are not doing these things and need to make some shifts in staffing and in programming. This really boils down to a couple of things. First of all is the third grade reading law that was passed several years ago that can be interpreted many ways, but creates a standard for third graders learning to read, whether or not they need literacy supports or have a special ed diagnosis, special education eligibility. And that has been interpreted in many different ways. These dyslexia laws have grown out of that, but also out of what we call the science of reading and what I affectionately call the reading wars. There's been a lot of controversy in the last several years about how to teach reading and what are the best evidence-based practices, and even calling into some very well-known, historically used reading curriculums, calling those to question over the science of reading. As teachers in the classrooms doing this work every day, your best bet is always to do a little bit of research, make sure you're using evidence-based instruction, and lean on your district for the support and the frameworks for what needs to happen. Some of this confusion also comes from the fact that dyslexia actually is defined 3 different ways, and it depends upon the organization you're working with or under and the setting of the student or the learner in need. I've outlined those definitions and given you a couple of different things to look at. I think one of the best things to look at is the myths versus facts. It's on slide 8 of our course slides this week, and they give a very brief overview definition that says dyslexia is a brain-based disorder associated with impairments in the brain regions that are associated with manipulation of sounds, not vision. That's really an umbrella definition that then we can go and dig into further. It also boils down to what are our educators' responsibilities. And on slide 15, I outlined those directly from the new legislation coming through Michigan. All educators need to know the characteristics and underlying factors of dyslexia that put students at risk for difficulty in learning. We also need to know the secondary characteristics of dyslexia, such as reading comprehension, growth of vocabulary, background knowledge, and how it can lead to social, emotional, and behavior difficulties. Educators need to know how to make instructional adjustments for students with dyslexia. And as a whole, as a profession, we need to have methods for developing school-wide and classroom infrastructures to meet all students' needs. And that really has its basis in our already established MTSS systems. We have to remember that this will be systemic for schools. This is really important to remember. When you read through the slides that I've provided for you, please don't think that this is in the lap of individual teachers and that we need to change our lesson planning and our day-to-day activities. There will be some slight changes to that, but what this legislation and change does is puts this on schools to build it into our systems and our frameworks and our school-wide supports. This also comes from the idea, you have to remember that this comes from the fact that a medical diagnosis or a diagnosis is not the same as eligibility for school services. We've talked about that a little bit when we talk about our educational disability categories, but if a student comes with a medical diagnosis of dyslexia from a pediatrician's office and brings that to the school, that does not automatically mean they are eligible for full special education services. In the state of Michigan, dyslexia continues to be identified as eligible for special education services under the definition of learning disabilities. So there's some nuance there, and that probably has contributed to the gray areas of dyslexia when it comes to working with those students in schools in Michigan. I've provided you with a lot of information on the following slides. I'd like you to go through those at your own pace and at your own need level. Some of this might be a definite review for a lot of you, especially if you're in elementary reading situations where you either receive or give support to students, either receive support for your classroom or give support to students. For others of you, this might be brand new, but it is something that is required of all students in teacher preparatory programs, but also all teachers in the state of Michigan. There are 3 articles that I would really like you to read. They're linked, they're provided in your Blackboard, but also linked on this slide. One is very short, definitions of dyslexia. The other's a little bit longer, called Dyslexia in the Classroom, what every teacher needs to know. And the last one is a 1-pager called Key Elements of Effective Instruction for Struggling Readers. Those are the assigned reading for this week, but I've also provided you the websites so that you can dig in and look for more resources or look for things that meet your learning need level better. There's a extra credit discussion board available to talk about your experiences with this, but that is optional for this week. And please contact me if you have any questions or you'd like to dig in a little bit deeper.